Jake Morrison felt his stomach drop as the transport ship began its final approach to station. Nexus 7. Through the small window beside his seat, he could see the massive military training facility floating in space like a metal city among the stars. The station was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Its dark gray surface was covered with weapon platforms, docking bays, and communication towers that reached out like the arms of some giant metal spider. Jake pressed his face closer to the window and watched smaller ships moving around the station like busy insects. Most of them were alien designs he had never seen before. Some looked like flying knives made of silver metal. Others were round and bulky with strange glowing parts. A few ships had no clear shape at all, just clusters of twisted metal that somehow managed to fly through space. The human took a deep breath and tried to calm his nerves. He was 24 years old, had served in the Earth Defense Force for 6 years, and had never backed down from a fight in his life. But this was different. This was the Galactic Defense Corps, the most elite military organization in known space. Every species in the galaxy sent their best warriors here to train, and Jake was the first human ever accepted into their program. The transport ship shuddered as it connected to one of the station's docking bays. Jake gathered his few belongings and joined the line of passengers waiting to exit. Most of them were aliens heading to the station for various reasons. Some were delivering supplies, others were visiting family members who worked there. Few looked like they might be new trainees like himself. Jake tried not to stare at his fellow passengers, but it was hard not to look. It was a tall, thin creature with blue skin and 4 arms, who kept checking some kind of device that glowed in its hands. Near the front of the line stood something that looked like a walking tree with eyes, its bark-like skin making soft creaking sounds as it moved. Behind Jake, a creature that resembled a large cat with silver fur was having a quiet conversation with what appeared to be a floating ball of light. The airlock opened with a hiss of escaping air, and the line began to move forward. Jake stepped through the entrance and into Station Nexus 7. The first thing that hit him was the size of the place. The docking bay ceiling stretched up so high he could barely see it. The walls were lined with different types of atmosphere processors, gravity, generators, and environmental controls designed to keep hundreds of different alien species comfortable. The second thing Jake noticed was the noise. Dozens of different languages filled the air as beings from across the galaxy went about their business. Some voices were high and musical, others were deep and rumbling. A few sounded like machines talking to each other in beeps and electronic tones. Mixed in with all the voices was the constant sound of machinery, footsteps, and the hum of energy systems keeping the station running. Jake looked around for someone who might be expecting him. According to his orders, he was supposed to report to his training instructor immediately upon arrival. He scanned the crowd of aliens moving through the docking bay, trying to spot anyone who looked like they might be looking for a new human trainee. He did not have to wait long. A voice like grinding stone spoke from behind him. "You must be the human." Jake turned around and found himself looking up at the largest living thing he had ever seen. The creature stood at least 8 feet tall and was built like a mountain of muscle covered in dark green scales. Its head was long and narrow like a crocodile's, with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the station's artificial light. 2 rows of sharp teeth showed when it spoke, and Jake could see a forked tongue flicking out to taste the air between them. The alien wore a military uniform that Jake recognized as belonging to a high-ranking instructor. Dark blue fabric stretched across its massive chest, and several rows of medals and rank insignia decorated the front. On its shoulders were the golden bars that marked it as a commander in the Galactic Defense Corps. "I am Commander Zex Collar," the creature said, its voice carrying easily over the noise of the docking bay. "I will be your primary instructor during your time here, assuming you last long enough to need instruction." Jake snapped to attention and saluted in the Earth military style. "Yes, sir. Private Jake Morrison, reporting for training, sir." Commander Zex Collar looked down at Jake like he was examining a particularly unimpressive insect. The alien's yellow eyes moved slowly from Jake's head to his feet and back again, taking in every detail. Jake could feel the weight of that gaze and tried to stand as straight and tall as possible. "So small," the commander said, almost to himself. So weak-looking. No claws, no natural armor. No enhanced strength or speed. How did such a pathetic species ever make it to the stars? Other aliens in the docking bay had begun to notice the conversation. Jake could see them slowing down as they walked past, some stopping entirely to stare at him. He had expected this kind of attention. Humans were new to galactic society, and most species had never seen one before. But the way they looked at him made him feel like an animal in a zoo. Commander Zex Kalar began walking in a slow circle around Jake, still examining him with those cold yellow eyes. "I have been training warriors for 43 years, the alien said. I have worked with beings from 67 different species. I've turned cowards into heroes and weaklings into champions. But I have never been asked to train something quite so... I'm promising." Jake kept his eyes fixed straight ahead and his mouth shut. He had been warned that alien instructors might try to intimidate him, and he had been told that the best response was to remain calm and professional. But it was hard to stay calm when a giant reptilian predator was calling him worthless in front of a growing crowd of onlookers. "The Krillians have natural armor that can stop plasma bolts," the commander continued as he circled. "The Vorthok have 6 arms and can move faster than most species can see. The Zelenites can manipulate energy with their minds. Even the peaceful Andromedans have enhanced intelligence that lets them solve problems in seconds that would take others hours." The aliens stopped directly in front of Jake and leaned down until their faces were only inches apart. Jake could smell something like sulfur on the commander's breath and feel the heat radiating from the alien's scaled skin. "And what do humans have?" Sixcalar asked quietly. "What special gift does your species bring to the galaxy that makes you worthy of training alongside real warriors?" Jake met the alien's gaze without flinching. "I don't know, sir. I guess we'll find out together." For a moment, the commander's expression didn't change. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth turned up in what might have been a smile if it had belonged to something friendlier. The rows of sharp teeth gleamed in the artificial light. "Yes," Zexcalar said, straightening up to his full height. "I believe we will." Jake's first week at Station Nexus 7 was harder than anything he had ever experienced. Each morning began at what the station called Zero Wooer. Though with no sun or moon to mark time, Jake had to rely on his wrist computer to know when to wake up. The alarm would sound through his small quarters. He would have exactly 10 minutes to dress, clean himself, and report to the main training hall. The training hall was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness and walls lined with equipment Jake didn't recognize. The floor was divided into different sections for different types of exercises. One area had gravity generators that could make someone feel like they weighed 10 times their normal weight. Another section was filled with obstacle courses that seemed to change shape every day. A third area had combat rings, where trainees could practice fighting against each other or against training robots. Jake's fellow trainees were impressive in ways that made him feel small and weak. There was Korax, a Krillian warrior who stood 7 feet tall and had natural armor plating covering his arms and chest. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and fighting skills. When Korax hit the heavy training bags, the sound echoed through the entire hall like thunder. Then there was Slicks, a Vorthok assassin with 6 arms and reflexes so fast that Jake could barely see her move. Her species came from a high-gravity world where everything was dangerous, so they had evolved to be incredibly quick and agile. When Slicks ran through the obstacle courses, she looked like a blur of motion that seemed to flow over, under and around every barrier without slowing down. The Zelenite trainee called himself Luminos, though Jake suspected that wasn't his real name. The Zelenites were beings of pure energy, who had to wear special containment suits to interact with solid matter. Luminos could manipulate electromagnetic fields with his mind, making him incredibly good at the technical exercises that involved computers and electronic systems. There were 12 other trainees from various species, each one gifted with natural abilities that their evolution had given them. Some could see in complete darkness, others could breathe different types of atmosphere, or survive in the vacuum of space for short periods. A few could communicate telepathically, or had enhanced senses that let them detect things Jake couldn't even imagine. And then there was Jake, human, average height, average strength, no special abilities, no natural weapons or armor. When the trainees lined up for their first physical assessment, Jake looked like a child standing among giants. Commander Zexkalar seemed to take special pleasure in pointing out Jake's shortcomings. During strength tests, the commander would announce Jake's results to the entire group. The human lifts 200 pounds while Korax lifts 800, he would say in his grinding voice. Perhaps the human should consider a career in food service instead of warfare. The speed tests were even worse. While other trainees completed obstacle courses in seconds, Jake struggled through them in minutes. His human body, designed for endurance rather than quick bursts of activity, couldn't compete with beings who had evolved for speed and agility. More than once, Jake found himself stuck in sections of the course that other trainees had flowed through like water. The worst part was the combat simulations. Each trainee had to face holographic enemies designed to test their fighting abilities. The Krillians faced opponents that matched their strength, forcing them to use strategy along with power. The Vorthok fought against multiple fast-moving targets that tested their reflexes. The Zelenites battled energy-based creatures that required them to use their electromagnetic abilities. Jake's simulations were designed for baseline humanoid opponents. But even these gave him trouble. While other trainees dispatched their holographic enemies quickly, Jake had to work hard for every victory. His human body didn't have claws or natural weapons, so he had to rely on the basic hand-to-hand combat training he had received on Earth Commander. Zexkalar made sure everyone noticed Jake's struggles. "Observe the human's technique," he would announce during combat training. "See how it flails about like a drowning animal? This is what happens when a species reaches beyond its natural limits." The other trainees began to see Jake as a source of entertainment. They would gather around to watch him struggle through exercises that they found easy. Some would place bets on how long it would take him to complete various tasks. Others would laugh when he failed to clear obstacles or when he was knocked down during combat practice. But Jake noticed something that the others missed. While each alien species was incredibly good at certain things, they were terrible at others. Korax was amazingly strong, but he moved slowly and had trouble with exercises that required flexibility. When the gravity generators were turned down to simulate low-gravity environments, the big Krillian became clumsy and confused. Slix was incredibly fast and agile, but she panicked in enclosed spaces. Her species had evolved in wide-open areas with room to run and dodge. When training exercises took place in narrow tunnels or small rooms, the Vorthok assassin would freeze up and lose all her natural grace. Luminos could manipulate energy and solve complex technical problems, but he struggled with anything that required physical strength or endurance. His energy-based body didn't need to breathe or eat like organic beings, but it also couldn't push or lift or carry things the way flesh and blood could. Jake started keeping notes about his fellow trainees, strengths and weaknesses. While they slept or celebrated their daily victories, he would sit in his quarters and write down everything he had observed. He noted that Korax always turned left when confused, that Slix held her breath when she was nervous, and that Luminos's energy field flickered when he was tired. The human also began to notice patterns in the training exercises. Commander Zexkalar rotated through different types of challenges, but there was a system to it. Physical strength tests on certain days, speed and agility on others, technical challenges mixed in between. Jake started preparing for each type of exercise in advance, doing extra research and practice when others were resting. Most importantly, Jake realized that while other species had evolved to be perfect at one thing, humans had evolved to be adequate at many things. He might not be as strong as a Krillian or as fast as a Vorthok, but he could do a little bit of everything. His human ancestors had survived by being adaptable, by learning new skills and adjusting to different situations. By the end of his first week, Jake was still finishing last in most exercises, but the gap was getting smaller. He was learning to use his human flexibility and endurance to make up for his lack of natural weapons or enhanced abilities. More importantly, he was learning to think like a human rather than trying to fight like an alien. Commander Zexkalar had not noticed the change yet, but Jake could feel it happening. The other trainees still saw him as weak and amusing, but that was fine with him. Let them underestimate the human. Okay. Jake had a feeling that would work in his favor sooner than they expected. The real test would come when they moved from basic training to actual combat exercises. That was when Jake would find out if his human adaptability could overcome the natural advantages of species that had been bred for war. 3 weeks had passed since Jake arrived at Station Nexus 7. Commander Zexcaler was getting tired of waiting for the human to break. Every day he watched Jake struggle through the training exercises, finish last in most competitions, and get knocked down during combat practice. But the human kept getting back up. He kept trying, kept showing up for training each morning with the same determined expression on his face. This frustrated the commander more than he wanted to admit. In his 43 years of training warriors, he had developed a sense for when someone was about to quit. There were signs that showed when a trainee was reaching their limit. They would start moving slower, making more mistakes, looking around for exits during difficult exercises. But Jake showed none of these signs. If anything, he seemed to be getting more focused as the days went by. The commander decided it was time to make an example of the human. He needed to show the other trainees what happened when someone tried to reach beyond their natural abilities. He needed to demonstrate that some species were simply not meant to be warriors, no matter how hard they tried. On a training day that started like any other, Commander Zexcaler gathered all the trainees in the main combat ring. The ring was a circular platform about 30 feet across, surrounded by energy barriers that could contain most types of weapons and abilities. Above the ring, viewing platforms allowed instructors and visiting officials to watch training matches. Today, we will have a special demonstration, the commander announced, his voice carrying easily through the large space. One of you will face a real combat situation against a superior opponent. This will show you the importance of knowing your limitations and accepting your place in the natural order. The trainees looked around at each other, wondering who would be chosen. Most of them assumed it would be one of the weaker students. But they figured it would be someone who at least had a chance of putting up a good fight. Commander. Scholar's yellow eyes fixed on Jake. Human, step forward. Jake walked to the edge of the combat ring, his heart beating faster, but his face showing no emotion. He had been expecting something like this for days. Commander's frustration with him had been growing more obvious. And Jake knew that sooner or later there would be a confrontation. You will face cracks in single combat, the commander said, gesturing to the largest Krillian in the training group. No weapons, no protective gear, no assistance from anyone. The match continues until one of you cannot continue. Crax stepped forward with a confident smile on his armored face. He was nearly 8 feet tall and weighed at least 400 pounds. His natural armor could stop most handheld weapons, and his arm blades could cut through steel. Among the Krillian people, he was considered a prodigy, someone who might one day become a great war leader. The other trainees pressed against the energy barriers, eager to watch what they assumed would be a quick and brutal demonstration. Some of them had placed bets on how long Jake would last. The most optimistic estimates gave him 2 minutes before Crax knocked him unconscious. Jake stepped into the ring and began stretching his muscles. Going through the warm-up routine he had developed over the past 3 weeks, he moved slowly and carefully, taking his time to prepare his body for what was coming. To most observers, he looked calm and relaxed, but inside his mind was racing through everything he had learned about Krillian physiology and fighting techniques. Krillians were incredibly strong and well-armored, but they had weaknesses. Armor was thickest on their chest and arms but thinner at the joints. Their fighting style was based on direct attacks and shows of strength, which made them predictable. Most importantly, they were used to opponents who tried to match their power with power of their own. Jake had no intention of fighting like a Krillian. Commander Zexcaler activated the ring's recording systems so that other instructors could review the match later. He wanted this to be a teaching moment that would be remembered for years. This demonstration will show you what happens when natural selection is ignored, he announced to the gathered trainees. Begin. Crax immediately charged across the ring, his massive form moving with surprising speed for something so large. His arm blades extended with a metallic sound, and he aimed a powerful strike at Jake's chest that would have ended the fight in seconds. But Jake was not where Crax expected him to be. The human had dropped low and rolled to the side using his smaller size and flexibility to avoid the attack entirely. As Krax's momentum carried him forward, struck at the back of the Krillian's knee. Hitting a pressure point he had memorized from his studies of alien anatomy, Krax stumbled but did not fall. Spun around with another attack, this time trying to catch Jake with a backhand blow that would have sent a human flying across the ring. Again, Jake was somewhere else, moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. The fight continued for several minutes, with Krax becoming increasingly frustrated as he failed to land a solid hit on his smaller opponent. The Krillian was used to fights that ended quickly, with victory going to whoever was strongest or best armored. This strange dance of movement and evasion was unlike anything in his experience. Jake kept moving, striking at weak points when opportunities presented themselves, then getting away before Krax could retaliate. He hit nerve clusters that temporarily numbed the Krillian's limbs, pressure points that affected balance and coordination, and soft spots where the natural armor was thinnest. None of Jake's individual attacks did much damage, but they added up. Krax began to slow down as his body responded to the accumulated hits. His left arm went numb from a strike to his shoulder. His right leg started to buckle from repeated hits to his knee. His vision blurred when Jake managed to land a precise blow to a nerve cluster near his neck. The watching trainees had gone quiet. This was not the quick demonstration they had expected. The human was not only surviving against a superior opponent, he was winning. Commander Zexcalor watched with growing amazement and anger as his prized student was systematically taken apart by someone he had dismissed as worthless. This was not supposed to happen. The natural order was being violated in front of his eyes. The end came suddenly. Krax, desperate to finish the fight, attempted a massive overhead strike with both arm blades. It was the kind of attack that could split a tree in half, but it required him to commit his entire body to the motion Jake had been waiting for. Exactly this moment. As the Krillian brought his arms down, Jake stepped inside the attack and struck upward with both hands, hitting pressure points on either side of Krax's neck. The blow was precise and perfectly timed. Targeting nerves that controlled consciousness, Krax's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor of the ring like a falling building. The impact shook the entire platform, but the massive Krillian did not get back up. Jake stood over his fallen opponent, breathing hard but still on his feet. Around the ring, the other trainees stared in shocked silence. They had just watched the weakest member of their group defeat one of the strongest, and none of them understood how it had happened. Commander Zexcalor's face showed an expression that none of his students had ever seen before. For the first time in his long career, he was looking at a trainee who had completely surprised him. The human had done something that should have been impossible. The commander had no idea how to respond. Jake looked up at the viewing platform, where Commander Zexcalor stood watching. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, neither of them moved. And Jake straightened to attention and saluted, just as he had on his first day at the station. "Reporting successful completion of the exercise, sir?" Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent training hall. The silence stretched on for several more seconds before Commander Zexcalor found his voice. "Medical team to combat. Ring 1, he said into his communication device. All trainees dismissed for the day. As the other students filed out of the training hall, many of them looked back at Jake with new expressions on their faces. The human was no longer just entertainment, or an object of pity. He was something else entirely, something they had not expected and did not yet understand. Jake helped the medical team move Krax to the station's medical bay, where the Krillian would recover fully from his temporary unconsciousness. Walked through the corridors of Station Nexus 7, Jake could feel that something had changed. The other beings they passed looked at him differently now. Word of what had happened in the combat ring was already spreading throughout the station, but Jake knew that his real test was just beginning. Commander Zexcalor would not let this victory go unanswered. The human had challenged everything. Commander believed about natural superiority and the proper order of things. The war between them had truly begun. Commander Zexcalor did not sleep well that night. The image of Jake standing over Krax's unconscious body kept playing in his mind. For 43 years he had believed that strength came from natural gifts, from the advantages that evolution gave two different species. The Krillians were strong, the Vorthok were fast, the Zelenites were smart. That was the way the galaxy worked. That was the natural order. But the human had broken that order, and the commander could not accept it. The next morning, Jake reported for training as usual, but he found the main hall empty except for Commander Zexkalar. The other trainees were nowhere to be seen, and the normal sounds of daily training were absent. Silence felt heavy and dangerous. The other students had been assigned to different instructors for the next week, the commander said without looking at Jake. You and I will be working together privately. I have decided that you need special attention. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his voice steady. Yes, sir. What kind of special training? Commander Zexkalar turned to face him, and Jake saw something in those yellow eyes that had not been there before. It was not just anger or frustration, it was something darker, something that looked like hatred mixed with fear. We are going to find your breaking point, human, the commander said softly. Every being has limits. Every species has weaknesses. I am going to discover yours. What followed was 7 days of torture disguised as training. Commander Zexkalar subjected Jake to exercises that violated every safety protocol on the station. He set the gravity generators to levels that should have crushed human bones. He forced Jake to train for 36 hours straight without sleep or food. He created combat scenarios that were designed to be impossible to survive. On the first day, Jake was locked in a chamber where the gravity increased every hour. By the end of the session, he was crawling on his hands and knees, unable to stand under the crushing weight.
Ouch.
But he kept moving. He kept trying to complete the exercise objectives that the commander had given him. On the second day, Jake was put through psychological tests that were meant to break his mind. He was forced to watch recordings of Earth being destroyed over and over while alien voices told him that his species was worthless and doomed. But Jake had grown up during the early days of human space exploration, when failure meant death and giving up meant extinction. The recordings hurt, but they did not break him. On the third day, Commander Zexkalar tried sensory deprivation. Jake was placed in a chamber with no light, no sound, and no sensation except the feeling of floating in warm liquid. Most beings would lose their sanity after a few hours in such conditions. Jake stayed in the chamber for 18 hours, and when he came out, he was still thinking clearly. The commander tried everything he could think of. Heat that should have cooked human flesh, cold that should have frozen human blood, poisons that should have shut down human organs. But Jake's ancestors had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, plagues and famines, predators and natural disasters. The human body was designed to endure things that would kill more specialized species. More importantly, Jake's mind was adapting to each new challenge. He began to recognize the patterns in the commander's tests. He learned to prepare his body and mind for different types of stress. He developed techniques for staying conscious during extreme gravity, for maintaining sanity during sensory deprivation, for surviving conditions that should have been fatal by the fourth day. Commander Zexkalar was running out of ideas. He had tried every method he knew for breaking a trainee's spirit, but the human kept getting back up. Jake was exhausted, hurt, and pushed beyond what should have been possible, but he was still functioning, still following orders. He was still trying to complete every impossible task the commander gave him. The commander began to make mistakes. His anger was affecting his judgment. He would set up training scenarios without thinking them through completely. He would forget to monitor Jake's vital signs during dangerous exercises. He would lose track of time and leave Jake in harmful conditions longer than he intended. Jake noticed every mistake. His human brain evolved to spot patterns and remember details, was cataloging everything the commander did wrong. He began to understand that Zexkalar was not the perfect instructor he pretended to be. The alien was driven by emotion rather than logic. He was making decisions based on pride and fear instead of tactical thinking. On the fifth day, something changed. Jake was in the middle of another impossible. Combat simulation, when he realized that he was no longer just surviving the commander's tests, he was analyzing them, understanding them, and finding ways to turn them to his advantage. Extreme gravity training had made him stronger. Sleep deprivation had taught him to function on less rest. The psychological warfare had made his mind more resistant to mental attacks. Commander Zexcalar was not breaking Jake. He was making him more dangerous. The 6th day brought the most brutal test yet. Jake was placed in a chamber filled with automated weapons that fired training bolts at him from every direction. The bolts were not lethal, but they delivered painful electric shocks that would disable most beings after a few hits. The test was supposed to last for 1 hour, but the commander left Jake in the chamber for 4 hours when Jake finally emerged. His body was covered with burn marks from the training bolts, but he was still conscious and still able to walk. More importantly, he had learned to predict the firing patterns of the automated weapons. By the end of the session, he was avoiding most of the shots and had even managed to disable 2 of the weapon systems. Commander Zexcalar stared at Jake with something approaching disbelief. "How are you still standing?" he asked. Jake looked back at the commander with calm, steady eyes. "'Cause I'm human, sir. We don't know how to quit." That night, Jake lay in his quarters thinking about everything that had happened during the past week. He was exhausted and in pain, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. He understood now that Commander Zexcalar was not trying to train him. The alien was trying to prove that humans did not belong in the galaxy's elite military forces, but the commander had made a critical error. He had assumed that breaking Jake would be like breaking any other species. He had not understood that humans were different. They had not evolved to be the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. They had evolved to survive anything, to adapt to any situation, to keep going when every rational calculation said they should give up. Jake had spent 6 days learning everything there was to know about Commander Zexcalar. He had studied the alien's methods, his weaknesses, his fears, and his mistakes. He had endured torture that would have killed members of supposedly superior species. And now he was ready to turn the tables. The 7th day would be different. Jake could feel it in his bones. The commander thought he was close to breaking the human, but he had no idea what he had actually created. A week of brutal training had not destroyed Jake's spirit. It had forged it into something harder and more dangerous than Commander Zexcalar could possibly imagine. Jake. After 7 days of hell, he was becoming something much more dangerous. He was becoming a human being who had been pushed too far, and who now understood exactly what he was capable of. Tomorrow, Commander Zexcalar would learn what happened when someone tried to break a human and failed. Tomorrow, the instructor would become the student, and the lesson would be one he would never forget. Jake closed his eyes and began to plan. He had endured the worst the commander could offer. It was time to show the alien what humans could do when they stopped holding back. On the 7th day, Commander Zexcalar had prepared what he believed would be Jake's final test. The alien had spent the night designing a simulation that no single being could possibly survive. It would require the natural abilities of at least 4 different species working together. The commander was certain that this would finally prove the human's worthlessness and restore the natural order he believed in. The simulation chamber was the largest training facility on Station Nexus 7. It could recreate any environment in the galaxy and present challenges that tested every possible skill a warrior might need. Commander Zexcalar had programmed it with a sequence of deadly scenarios that would push Jake beyond any reasonable limit. Other instructors had gathered too. Watch, along with several high-ranking officers who had heard rumors about the unusual training that had been taking place. They filled the observation deck above the simulation chamber, curious to see what the commander was trying to prove with his human trainee. Jake entered the chamber, wearing standard training gear and carrying no weapons. His week of brutal testing, but his eyes were alert and focused. He had spent hours the night before preparing for this moment, not just physically but mentally. He knew this would be his final confrontation with Commander Zexcalar. Today, you will face the ultimate test, the commander announced over the chamber's communication system. You will encounter 5 different environments, each one designed to require abilities your species does not possess. You surely will. Perhaps you will finally understand your place in the galaxy. The first environment materialized around Jake as the simulation began. He found himself standing on a frozen wasteland where the temperature was far below what most organic life could survive. Howling winds carried ice crystals that cut like knives, and the ground was covered with snow so deep that each step required tremendous effort. Most species would have frozen to death within minutes, but Jake's ancestors had survived the ice. Ages of Earth, his human body began adjusting to the cold, conserving heat and increasing blood flow to vital organs. He moved steadily across the frozen landscape using techniques his military training had taught him for surviving in extreme cold. The second environment replaced the ice with the vacuum of space. Jake found himself floating in zero gravity among spinning asteroids and debris. This scenario was designed to test beings who had evolved in space or had natural abilities that let them navigate without gravity or atmosphere. Jake held his breath and used his training in zero-gravity movement to push off from asteroids and guide himself through the dangerous field. His human spatial reasoning, developed through millions of years of tool use and three-dimensional thinking, helped him calculate trajectories and avoid collisions. He made it through the asteroid field with seconds to spare before his breath ran out. The third environment was underwater, deep beneath an alien ocean where the pressure should have crushed any land-dwelling creature. This section was meant for species that had evolved in aquatic environments or had special breathing apparatus. But humans had always been excellent swimmers and divers. Jake's body adapted to the pressure as much as it could, and he used breath holding, techniques that pearl divers on Earth had developed over thousands of years. He swam through underwater mazes and avoided predatory creatures that the SMO simulation had placed in his path. The fourth environment was a high radiation zone that glowed with deadly energy. Most organic beings would have died from exposure within seconds. This scenario was designed for energy-based life forms or species with natural radiation shielding. Jake had studied the station's layout during his weeks of training, and he knew about the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath every major facility. Instead of trying to survive the radiation, he found access panels that led to the tunnel system. He crawled through narrow spaces that larger beings could never have fit through. Bypassing the radiation zone entirely, the final environment should have been Jake's death sentence. He emerged from the maintenance tunnels to find Commander Zek's collar waiting for him in full combat armor. The simulation had been programmed to end with personal combat, and the commander intended to finish what his tests had failed to accomplish. Impossible, Zixcalar said as Jake stood up and faced him. No single being should have been able to survive all 5 environments. You must have cheated somehow. Gashish. Jake looked at the massive alien and spoke in perfect Drakmori language using words he had learned during his study of different species on the station. The only cheating here has been done by you, Commander. It broken safety protocols, violated training regulations, and allowed your personal feelings to interfere with your duty as an instructor. The commander's eyes widened in surprise. He had not known that Jake could speak his native language, and the human's pronunciation was flawless. But Jake was just getting started. You are afraid, Jake continued in Drakmori. You are afraid that your entire belief system is wrong. You are afraid that natural gifts mean nothing compared to determination and adaptability. You are afraid that a species you consider inferior might actually be superior to you in the ways that truly matter. Commander Zexcalar roared in anger and charged at Jake, his massive claws extended and his teeth bared. But Jake was ready. He had spent a week learning everything about the commander's fighting style, his emotional triggers, and his weaknesses. Jake did not try to fight the commander with strength or speed. Instead, he used words as weapons, speaking in the languages of different species represented on the station. He talked about the commander's failures as an instructor, his inability to adapt his teaching methods, his reliance on intimidation instead of actual training. The Krillian battle codes say that a true warrior adapts to any situation, Jake said, switching to the Krillian language. The Vorthok teachings emphasize that flexibility defeats rigidity. Even the Zelenite philosophies state that energy must flow around obstacles rather than trying to smash through them. With each word, Commander Zexcalar became more confused and angry. Jake was using the alien's own cultural knowledge against him, proving that the human had studied and understood the beliefs of species throughout the galaxy. The commander's attacks became wild and uncontrolled as his emotions overwhelmed his training. "You want to know what makes humans special?" Jake asked, now speaking in perfect galactic standard so that all the observers could understand him. "We do not have the strongest claws or the thickest armor or the fastest reflexes. What we have is the ability to learn from anyone, adapt to anything, and never give up, no matter how hopeless things seem." Commander Zexcalar stumbled and fell to his knees, not from any physical blow, but from the weight of Jake's words. Everything the alien had believed about superior and inferior species was crumbling around him. He had tried to break the human, but instead the human had broken his certainty, his pride, and his understanding of how the galaxy worked. "I spent this week learning from you, Commander," Jake said quietly. "You taught me about endurance, about survival, about what happens when someone pushes a human beyond all reasonable limits. You taught me that no matter how bad things get, there is always a way forward, if you are willing to adapt and learn." The simulation chamber fell silent except for the sound of Commander Zexcalar's heavy breathing. On the observation deck, the other instructors and officers watched in amazement as the galaxy's most feared trainer was reduced to a broken figure kneeling before a human trainee. Jake extended his hand to help the commander stand up. "Thank you for the lessons, sir. Could not have learned them from anyone else." Commander Zexcalar looked up at Jake's offered hand, then slowly reached out and accepted the help. As he stood, something in his yellow eyes had changed. The hatred and fear were gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. 3 months later, Jake Morrison graduated first in his class from the Galactic Defense Corps training program. Commander Zexcalar requested a transfer to a teaching position at the Corps Academy, where he began developing new training methods based on adaptability rather than natural advantages. The story of what happened in that simulation chamber spread throughout the galaxy. Other species began to look at humans with new interest, wondering what other surprises the strange, adaptable creatures might have in store, and in the deepest corners of space, where threats to galactic peace were stirring those who meant harm. Too, the civilized worlds began to worry about a new variable in their calculations. They'd always planned around the known strengths and weaknesses of established species. None of them had planned for humans.